Anatomy of a Public Execution. The courtroom air was thick, a cocktail of stale perfume and collective schadenfreude. Here sat Johnny Depp, no longer a pirate king or a whimsical chocolatier, but Exhibit A in a global spectacle. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi were not adoring strobes anymore. They were muzzle flashes in a meticulously planned character assassination. A campaign that felt less like a legal dispute and more like a personal Operation Absolute Resolve waged against one man. Pause. The objective was total dismantlement. His legacy, once etched in the granite of Hollywood history, was being power-washed with acid in the court of public opinion. Every eccentric interview, every past indulgence, was recontextualized into a data point for his damnation. This was the great unraveling, a public vivisection where the world was invited to watch a star bleed out. He had become a ghost at his own funeral, a walking effigy of canceled culture. The verdict, when it came, was almost a formality. The real sentence had been passed months earlier, in 1 million tweets and 1,000 headlines. The sentence was exile. This was the anatomy of a fall, a post-mortem audit on a career that had been declared dead on arrival. The only question left was who signed the death certificate. The architecture of a fragile empire. Before the fall, there was the ascent, a frantic climb built on instinct, luck, and a profound disdain for the conventional. He was a high school dropout from Kentucky, a musician who stumbled into acting through a door opened by his first wife and Nicolas Cage. A fateful accident. His early success smelled of fresh celluloid and old fear. The fear of returning to nothing. He built his empire not with the clean lines of a calculated careerist, but with the chaotic energy of a renegade artist. Each strange, beautiful, and broken character he played, from a boy with scissors for hands to a Mad Hatter, was another gargoyle added to his Gothic cathedral of fame. These were not just roles, they were armor. But the architecture of his life was inherently unstable. He courted danger, lived in the character of Johnny Depp long after the camera stopped rolling. His life became an off-screen performance. Every high-profile romance, every purchased island, every bottle of vintage wine was a brick in his fortress of solitude. Pause. But these same bricks would later be used as projectiles against him. The fatal error was not a single act, but a lifestyle. A belief that the rules of gravity, both fiscal and social, did not apply to him. He was building a beautiful, precarious tower, forgetting that the higher you climb, the further you have to fall. The verdict was not a legal document. It was a professional obituary. A career built on eccentric charm and billion-dollar franchises, a carefully constructed empire of scarves and whispered line delivery, was dismantled not by a jury, but by the court of public opinion. The gavel fell, and its echo became a deafening silence in the boardrooms of Hollywood. This was the fatal error. Not an action, but a perception. The moment the battle became public, the war was already lost. The machinery of fame, which had propelled him into the stratosphere, reversed its gears with brutal efficiency. It became a meat grinder. Every headline was a turn of the crank. Every talk show monologue, another pound of flesh. He was no longer an actor. He was a case study. A cautionary tale whispered over cocktails in the Hollywood Hills. The invitations stopped. The phone calls went unanswered. His name, once a guarantee of box office gold, became a liability, a risk no insurer would underwrite. The exile was not a physical one. It was a far more profound banishment. He was erased from the present tense of the industry he helped define. He became a ghost haunting his own back catalog, a digital specter on streaming platforms. The architecture of his fragile empire, built on the shifting sands of public adoration, had crumbled. All that remained were the expensive, empty ruins. After the noise comes the silence. A silence so profound it has its own weight, its own texture. This is the anatomy of the quiet reinvention, a deliberate retreat from the public gaze, framed as a choice. He traded blockbuster scripts for blank canvases. He traded red carpet interrogations for the quiet communion of a recording studio. A man methodically erasing himself from the narrative. This new chapter, this so-called peace, is a fortress built of privacy and silence. His interviews speak of no longer needing to prove anything, a declaration of freedom, pause, or a confession of defeat. The art is not for exhibition. The music is not for the charts. They are artifacts of a post-mortem audit, a man sifting through the wreckage of his own public persona. And then, the new romance. A relationship notable only for its absence from the headlines. The partner is a shadow, a whisper, valued not for her glamour, but for her discretion. This is not the fiery passion of past entanglements. It is a strategic alliance for stability, a shield, a heavily redacted document in the dossier of his life. Those close to him report a newfound contentment, but the camera never lies. The eyes still hold the geography of a long war. This quiet life is not a return to innocence. It is the gilded cage of a man who has survived his own public execution and now resides in the shadow of his own bunker, forever sorting through the obituaries. He admitted it himself, a confession not made in a courtroom, but in the quiet tribunal of his own mind. For years, his life was an off-screen performance, a role he never auditioned for, but was forced to play until the final, bitter curtain call. The decision to emotionally opt out was not retirement. It was an act of self-preservation, a strategic retreat into the bunkers, shadow a fortress built of silence and canvas. The public saw a star dimming a legacy, fading into scandal. The dossier reveals a man methodically dismantling a prison he had helped construct, brick by golden brick. The relentless machinery of Hollywood, the constant gnawing demand for the next spectacle, had become creatively draining. A meat grinder, for the soul leaving behind only the gristle of a public persona. He traded the deafening roar of the crowd for the clean hum of a guitar amplifier in an empty room. He exchanged the epileptic flash of paparazzi bulbs for the steady, solitary glow of a painter's lamp. This was a posthumous audit of a life still being lived, an inventory of sins and sorrows conducted far from the public gaze. His new projects became selective, deliberate like a bomb disposal expert choosing which wire to cut. Collaborations with artists who valued the story, not the stock price. It was a quiet rebellion against the very empire that crowned him and then demanded his head on a platter. But this exile, this self-imposed Siberia of the spirit, was not one of pure loneliness. The silence of his new life was profound. Yes, but it was not empty. It was a space being cleared, a foundation being swept clean of the wreckage. Pause for something else. The shared silence of a morning coffee, the country walk where hands don't need to touch, the mutual understanding that their story is not for sale. She is an anchor dropped in a quiet harbor, holding the ship steady after a hurricane that nearly tore its hull to pieces. While Depp himself has offered no public statement, the verdict is written on his face. The visible contentment is its own press release. The absence of the haunted look that had become his mask for over a decade. This isn't a Hollywood ending, full of triumphant music and grand gestures. It is something far rarer, and perhaps more valuable. A quiet chapter, written in invisible ink after the world had already slammed the book shut. The public execution left a crater in his soul, a void that no amount of cinematic gold or fan adoration could ever hope to fill. The verdict of the media was absolute, a digital guillotine that severed him from his own carefully constructed myth. His mangled fate was sealed in the court of public opinion. So he built a bunker, not a physical structure of concrete and steel, but a psychological fortress built from silence and shared anonymity. The architecture of this new fortified life required a new partner, one defined not by her dazzling presence in the spotlight, but by her profound and deliberate absence from it. Her name is a whisper, a redacted file in the sprawling, messy archive of his life. She is not an actress vying for a role, not a model selling a fantasy, not a musician chasing a hit. She is an architect of privacy, the quiet, unseen curator of his newfound tranquility. The anatomy of his previous relationships was a public ledger. Every dinner date, a press release, every argument a headline waiting to be printed, a relentless spectacle for which the price of admission was his own sanity. This is different. This is a calculated retreat. This is survival. Those few who remain within the inner circle describe her as the antithesis of Hollywood's gravitational pull, a quiet, grounding force that anchors him to the real world, a world light years away from the courtroom cameras and the digital gallows. Her most valuable asset, the currency that bought his trust, is not her beauty or her intellect, though she possesses both. It is her complete and total pause, invisibility. She has no public footprint, no digital ghost, no hunger for the validation that almost destroyed him. This relationship grew in the shadow of the wreckage, like a rare resilient flower pushing through the cracks in scorched earth. It was not born of passion's frantic, consuming flame, but forged in the cold gray embers of his public immolation. He had stood alone on a global stage, a specimen under a microscope, every flaw magnified, every old wound prodded by a million anonymous strangers. The loneliness of that gilded pedestal was a unique and absolute hell. Now, the silence that fills the halls of his French estate is not the silence of abandonment. It is the deep, resonant silence of a fortress, the quiet hum of a life being lived entirely off camera, a life where value is not measured in box office returns, but in unobserved moments of peace. They are rarely seen. When they are, it's a fleeting glimpse captured by a long lens, exiting a dusty bookstore in a sleepy European town, sharing a bottle of wine on a secluded terrace where the only audience is the setting sun. There are no poses for the camera, no curated Instagram posts. Their life together is a classified document, its most important passages known only to them. This peace is a fragile truce, negotiated after a brutal, soul-scaring war. Every shared glance, every private dinner, every quiet conversation is a small defiant act against the fame industrial complex that nearly consumed him whole. He is systematically unwinding the persona of Johnny Depp, the global commodity, and rediscovering the man who existed before the machinery took over. He paints with a feverish intensity. He plays his worn-out guitar not for an arena, but for an audience of one. He reads voraciously, filling the quiet hours that were once packed with press junkets and fittings. These are not hobbies. They are acts of reclamation. He is reclaiming the hours, the days, the years that were sold to the public domain. The price of this new life was steep, a transaction paid in public humiliation and professional exile. It cost him his carefully polished public face. It cost him the intoxicating roar of the crowd. Pause, and perhaps it cost him the last vestiges of his once voracious ambition. But in the quiet bunker of the heart, he found something the crumbling empire could never provide: a safe harbor, a place where the legacy is no longer about the films he made, but about the peace he finally, painstakingly, built for himself. The final chapter is not about a comeback, it is about a successful escape.